final YouTube script for. Alien gangs thought he was a pushover until he beat their leader. Sci-Fi story, High Part 1. There is one rule that every species in the galaxy understands about prison. The first day decides everything. Show weakness once, just once, and you spend every day after that paying for it. It doesn't matter if you're 7 feet tall with 4 arms and scales that can stop a blade. It doesn't matter if you've ended wars or toppled governments or survived things that would break most living creatures before breakfast. The first day decides everything. Mike Calloway knew this. What the aliens in Vortex Station 7 didn't know, what nobody in that prison had bothered to find out, was that Mike had been having bad first days his entire life. Growing up in the roughest district of New Detroit, military service on 3 different war zones, 6 years in Black Ops diplomatic security, where negotiation sometimes meant breaking someone's arm before they finished their opening sentence. He wasn't soft. He wasn't scared. He was just quiet about it. And quiet, in a galaxy full of creatures that communicated dominance through size and noise and the number of limbs they could wave menacingly, got mistaken for something else entirely. It got mistaken for weakness. Vortex Station 7 was the galaxy's most infamous maximum security facility, a rotating metal nightmare orbiting a dead star, home to the worst criminals from 47 species. No sunlight, no outside contact, no mercy from the guards, who were themselves chosen for their complete emotional indifference to suffering. Mike had been here for 6 hours. He had already been tested twice. Both times he had said nothing. Stepped aside. Let go. Let them think what they wanted to think. His cellmate, a massive dark-scaled reptilian named Grax, who had survived 9 years in this place through pure, terrifying reputation, watched him from the corner of his bunk with the slow, calculating patience of a predator trying to figure out what kind of creature had wandered into its territory. "You know what they're saying about you," Grax said finally. His voice was low, like gravel shifting deep underground. "Probably," Mike said, "they're saying the human is easy, that he's the warden's gift to whoever wants to establish dominance this cycle." Grax tilted his massive head. "The Vorkai gang has already called you." Mike looked at the ceiling. "How many?" he asked. Grax paused, like the question itself was unexpected. 8, he said. Led by Drac, Venerable 4 Arms. 3 meters tall. Killed his last target with his bare hands in under 40 seconds. Mike nodded slowly. "When?" "Feeding hour. 3 hours from now." Mike closed his eyes. 3 hours. He'd been in worse situations with less time to prepare. He almost smiled. Almost. Feeding hour in Vortex Station 7 was not what the name suggested. It wasn't just a meal. It was a performance. A daily ritual where every gang, every faction, every dangerous collection of interstellar criminals reminded each other, and anyone watching, exactly where they stood in the hierarchy. Who sat where? Who ate first? Who had to wait? Who had to ask permission just to approach the dispensers? It was, Mike had realized within his first hour of observation, the most important 60 minutes of every day in this place. And in 3 hours, it was going to be his stage. He spent the time before it quietly, not pacing, not sharpening anything or doing aggressive push-ups or any of the other territorial displays that the other inmates used to signal readiness. He sat on his bunk. He watched. He cataloged. Grax observed this with growing confusion. "You're not preparing," the reptilian said. "I am preparing," Mike said. "I'm thinking." Thinking doesn't stop Drac Ven's fist. No, Mike agreed. But it helps you make sure his fist never gets close enough to matter. Grax was quiet for a moment. "The last human they put in here lasted 2 days," he said. "Not cruelly, just factually. What happened to him?" He tried to fight Drac Ven the same way Drac Ven fights. Big movements, direct force, strength against strength. Grax made a sound deep in his chest. Drac Ven weighs 400 kilograms, has 4 arms, grew up in a gravity, well, twice the strength of your planet. And the human tried to outmuscle him. Yes, that was his mistake, Mike said simply. Grax stared at him for a long time. "You've fought larger species before." It wasn't quite a question. "I've fought everything before," Mike said. The size changes. The principles don't. When feeding hour arrived, the cafeteria of Vortex Station 7 was exactly what Mike had expected. Loud, layered, every table a territory, every movement watched by a dozen sets of eyes calculating advantage and weakness simultaneously. The air smelled like industrial protein synthesis and something older and more animal underneath it. Mike took his tray, found an empty table near the center of the room, sat down, in the middle of everyone, not at the edges, not in a corner, not hidden or protected or near the wall, dead center, an invitation, or a declaration. Grax, who had followed at a careful distance, stopped walking when he saw where Mike had chosen to sit. His scaled face did something complicated. That, he said slowly, is either the bravest thing I have ever seen, or, Mike asked, lifting his utensil, or you have completely lost your mind. Mike started eating. Across the cafeteria, a shadow fell over the Vorkai table. Drac Ven, 4 arms folded, 3 meters of muscle and reputation and absolute certainty, turned his massive head slowly toward the human sitting alone at the center table. His eyes narrowed. Then he stood up. The entire cafeteria went quiet. Not gradually, all at once. Like someone had cut the sound with a blade, every inmate in Vortex Station 7 turned to watch. Mike kept eating. Drac Ven began walking toward him. And Mike, without looking up, without changing his expression, without doing anything at all dramatic, said quietly, just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "Sit down. I'll come to you when I'm finished eating." The silence somehow got louder. Nobody told Drac Ven to sit down. Ever. In 9 years at Vortex Station 7, across hundreds of confrontations, through the breaking of 11 different inmates who had made the mistake of thinking they could challenge him, nobody had ever in the history of his dominance over this facility told Drac Ven to sit down and wait. The cafeteria understood the magnitude of what had just happened. You could see it move through the room like a current. Heads turning, bodies going still. The particular electric tension of a crowd that knows it is watching something that will be talked about for years, either because of what happened next or because of what was left of the human afterward. Drac Ven stopped walking, his 4 arms uncrossed slowly. A threat display. The Vorkai equivalent of a weapon being drawn. "You," he said. His translator rendered it in flat standard, but the tone underneath needed no translation. "Do you know who I am?" Mike took another bite. Chewed, swallowed, looked up for the first time. "Drac Ven," he said pleasantly. "Vorkai species. For arms, which you're very proud of. Dominant left upper limb. You favor a forward weight stance that leaves your right lower side open for about a quarter second when you initiate a grab." He paused. "I've been watching you since I got here." The silence in the cafeteria had a texture now, dense and airless like the moment before a pressure seal blows. Drac Ven's eyes, all 3 of them, narrowed to slits. "You've been here 6 hours, he said slowly. "Long enough," Mike said. He set down his utensil, pushed his tray aside, and stood up. He was, by every physical measurement, absurdly outmatched. A full meter shorter than Drac, venerable A fraction of mass. 2 arms to 4. No natural armor, no claws, no secondary musculature evolved for combat in high gravity. Just a human standing in the middle of a cafeteria full of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, looking, somehow, completely unbothered. "Here's what's going to happen," Mike said, and his voice carried across the silent room with a clarity that suggested he was entirely aware of his audience and entirely comfortable with it. "You're going to take a swing at me. It's going to miss. And then we're going to have a much more interesting conversation about how this facility actually works." Drac Ven moved. Fast. Faster than something his size had any right to be. All 4 arms coming forward in a coordinated grab-and-crush sequence that had ended every previous fight in under 3 seconds. Mike wasn't there. He had moved before the arms fully extended, not backward, not sideways, but forward and inside, underneath the reach where 4 long arms became a liability instead of an advantage. He went low, used Drac Ven's own forward momentum. One precise application of redirected force at exactly the right joint angle. 400 kilograms of Vortex gang leader hit the cafeteria floor. The sound was enormous. Nobody breathed. Drac Ven was on the ground for exactly 2 seconds before he roared and came back up, faster than Mike expected, credit where it was due. But Mike had already reset. New position. Wait back. Reading the next movement before it started. Stop, Mike said. Drac Ven froze. Not from obedience. From something he hadn't felt in 9 years. Uncertainty. I didn't come here to hurt you, Mike said quietly. I came here to show everyone in this room, including you, that I'm not a target. There's a difference. He let that sit for a moment. I know the difference. The question is whether you do. Drac Ven stared at him from across the floor, 3 eyes burning, 4 fists clenched, and for the first time in 9 years, the leader of the Vortex did not immediately attack. He was thinking, which meant Mike's real plan, the one that had nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with what came after, was already working. The cafeteria stayed frozen for a long moment. Then Drac Ven did something nobody expected. He laughed, not the cruel, performative laugh of a predator toying with prey. Something rawer than that. Something that rumbled up from deep in his chest like an engine turning over after years of sitting cold. He laughed and picked himself up off the floor, all 400 kilograms of him, and stood there looking at Mike with those 3 narrowed eyes recalibrating everything they thought they knew. You're insane, he said. Frequently, Mike agreed. You could have run. Hidden. Found a corner and stayed in it. That buys a week, Mike said. Maybe 2. Then something worse happens in a less public place with no witnesses. He glanced around the silent cafeteria. This buys something permanent. Drac Ven was quiet for a moment, still processing, still recalculating. What do you want, human? Same thing everyone in here wants, Mike said. To survive, to do my time, to go home eventually. He paused, and while I'm here, to not spend every day fighting off the next test. I have no interest in running this place. I have no interest in anyone's territory, but I will not be a target. Not for anyone. The room was still listening. Every faction, every gang, every dangerous set of eyes in Vortex Station 7, taking in every word and filing it away. Mike knew that. He had known it from the moment he chose the center table. This was never just about Drac Ven. Drac Ven looked at him for a long time. Then he walked back to his table, sat down, picked up his food, and said nothing more. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't alliance. But in the language of Vortex Station 7, it was something equally valuable. It was acknowledgement. The cafeteria slowly, carefully returned to its normal noise. Conversations resumed. Utensils moved. The performance was over. Mike sat back down at his center table. 30 seconds later, Grax appeared across from him, set down his tray, sat down without asking permission or explaining himself. Just sat, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That, the reptilian said quietly, was either the most calculated thing I have ever witnessed or the most reckless. Both, Mike said. The Vortex won't come for you again. Not directly. Grax picked up his utensil. But you've created a new problem. I know, Mike said. The Sindri faction watched everything. Their leader, Vessa, she doesn't challenge publicly. She's patient. Strategic. Grax's voice dropped lower. She will come at you sideways. Through your food. Through your cell. Through whatever you care about. Mike nodded slowly. What do I care about in here? He said. I just arrived. Grax paused. Then quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he said, You care about getting out. They all know why you're here, Mike. The botched diplomatic mission. The dead official. The Galactic Council's scapegoat. Mike went very still. Vessa has connections outside, Grax continued. Council connections. And she has been in communication with someone on the outside who very much wants to make sure you never finish your sentence. The cafeteria noise continued around them. Normal. Oblivious. Mike stared at his food. He had come to Vortex Station 7 expecting to survive the inside. He hadn't fully accounted for how dangerous the outside could reach in. Who? He asked. Grax looked at him carefully. The same person who made sure you ended up here, he said. The one who actually killed that official. The one who needed a human to take the blame. Mike's jaw tightened. How do you know this? Grax was quiet for a long moment. Because, he said slowly, I was supposed to be watching you for them. Before you walked into that cafeteria and made me reconsider every assumption I had made about what kind of creature you are, the food between them sat untouched. They're paying you, Mike said. They were paying me, Grax said. There is a difference. Mike looked at him for a long moment, reading the scaled face, the ancient cautious eyes, the set of a jaw that had survived 9 years in this place through calculation more than violence. Why are you telling me this? Grax picked up his utensil. Because in 40 years of surviving dangerous places, he said quietly, I have learned one thing above everything else. He met Mike's eyes. Always bet on the most unpredictable creature in the room. The name Grax gave him was Counselor Veth Doran, senior member of the Galactic Council's Security Committee, decorated diplomat, public face of interspecies cooperation and the rule of law. The kind of figure whose portrait hung in government buildings across 14 systems and whose speeches about justice got rebroadcast on 100 different planetary networks. The man who had actually killed Ambassador Rellin on that station 6 months ago, the man who had needed someone in the room to take the blame, a human, convenient, isolated, easy to discredit, a species still new enough to galactic politics that nobody would ask too many questions about motive or evidence when the council pointed its collective finger. Mike had known he was set up. He had known it from the moment the security team arrived too quickly, from the moment his comm unit mysteriously failed to record the encounter, from the moment every piece of evidence arranged itself against him with a neatness that real crime scenes never had. He had not known who. Now he did, and knowing who changed everything. He has reach inside this facility, Mike said. The warden owes him 3 favors and a silence, Grax confirmed. 2 guards on the night rotation are on his payroll, and Vessa has been promised early release in exchange for making sure your sentence ends permanently before you can file any appeals. How long have I got? Vessa moved slowly. She'll want it to look natural. An accident. A fight that went wrong. Grax considered. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Mike nodded. Processing. Stacking variables. I need access to a communication terminal, he said. An unsupervised one. Grax made a sound that was distinctly unenthusiastic. The only unsupervised terminals in this facility are in the maintenance level, which is controlled by the Sindri faction. A pause, which is Vessa's territory. Of course it is, Mike said. There is another option, Grax said carefully, but you won't like it. Tell me anyway. Drac, venerable. Mike looked at him. The Vorkai have a smuggled unit. Old, military encryption that predates the Council's monitoring protocols. Completely untraceable. Grax met his eyes, but Drac Van would never lend it to someone he just put on the floor in front of his entire gang. You'd be surprised, Mike said slowly, what people lend you when they respect you. He stood up from the table. Where does Drac Van spend his evenings? The Vorkai territory was in the East Block, a series of cells they had claimed and fortified over years through force and negotiation, and the particular gravity that serious reputation creates. Mike walked into it alone. No backup, no weapon, nothing that could be read as aggression. 2 Vorkai guards stepped into his path before he reached the inner corridor. Human, the larger one said. The word carried a full paragraph of subtext. I need 5 minutes with Drac Van, Mike said. Tell him it's about the person who's been paying Vessa to have me killed. Tell him it's also about the person who personally lobbied the council 3 years ago to extend Drac Van's sentence by 15 years without new charges. The guard stared at him. Tell him, Mike repeated patiently. The guard disappeared. Came back 90 seconds later. Stepped aside without a word. Drac Van was in the back of the territory, seated on a fabricated platform that served as both furniture and throne. 4 arms folded, 3 eyes steady, the look of a creature who had decided to be curious before deciding to be dangerous. Veth Doran, Mike said without preamble. Something moved across Drakven's face. Fast and dark and old. You know that name? The Vorkai said slowly. I know what he did to your sentence. I know he flagged you as a security risk to block your appeal. Mike held the massive alien's gaze. I know he's been using this prison as a personal tool for years, keeping inconvenient people inside, removing inconvenient people permanently. And you think I care about justice? Drakven's voice was careful, controlled. I think you care about getting out, Mike said, and I think you've spent 3 years knowing exactly who is keeping you in and having no way to reach him. Silence. I can reach him, Mike said, but I need your communicator, and I need 3 days. Drakven looked at him for a long time. The calculation behind those 3 eyes was ancient and thorough and utterly unhurried. If you're lying to me, he said finally, I will find out, and no amount of cafeteria tricks will save you. I know, Mike said. Another long silence. Then one of Drakven's lower hands reached slowly into the platform beside him and produced a communicator that looked older than the prison itself. 3 days human, he said. Mike took it. 2, he said. I only need 2. The first call Mike made was not to a lawyer. It was not to the human diplomatic corps, not to Earth's galactic representative, not to any of the official channels that existed precisely for situations like his and had done absolutely nothing about his situation for 6 months. It was to a woman named Director Hannah Solis, former military intelligence, currently running a private investigative consultancy that officially handled corporate espionage cases and unofficially handled the kind of problems that governments created and then needed someone with no official connection to quietly fix. She and Mike had history, the complicated kind, the kind that meant when her communicator picked up an encrypted signal on a frequency she hadn't heard in 3 years, she answered on the second pulse and said nothing. Just listened. Mike talked for 4 minutes, gave her everything. Doran's name, the timeline, the evidence gaps that pointed back to the real shooter, the financial connection to Vessa inside Vortex Station 7, the warden's compromised status, the 2 guards on night rotation. When he finished, Hannah was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. You've been in there 6 months, and you already know the internal financial structure of the prison's corruption network, she said. I've had time to think, Mike said. How did you get an untraceable communicator inside a maximum security facility? I made a friend. You don't make friends. I'm growing, Mike said. A breath that might have been a laugh on the other end. Doran is protected, Mike. Council-level protection. I can't go at him directly without evidence that survives a formal challenge. I know. That's not what I'm asking for. He kept his voice low. The Vorkai territory was quiet around him, but quiet wasn't the same as private. I need you to find the original security footage from the station. The real footage, before it was edited. That footage was officially destroyed. Officially, Mike said, but Doran's office ran the destruction order themselves, which means someone on his staff executed it. And people who execute destruction orders on career-ending evidence don't always fully destroy it. Silence on the line. They keep insurance, Hannah said slowly. Everyone keeps insurance, Mike said. Find whoever processed that order. Find what they kept. That's all I need. And if I find it, send it to every independent galactic news network simultaneously, all at once. Don't give the council time to suppress it. Another silence. Longer. Mike, if this goes wrong... It won't, he said, but if it does, then I'm already in the worst prison in the galaxy, he said. My downside is limited. He ended the call, sat in the quiet of the Vorkai territory for a moment, then walked back through the corridors toward his cell. He had been gone 40 minutes. In those 40 minutes, something had shifted. He felt it before he saw it. The way attention moves in a confined space. The way eyes track differently when the subject of observation has changed status. In the morning he had been the new human, unknown quantity, presumed weak, designated target. Now he was something else. He could feel the recalibration happening in real time as he walked. Inmates who had pointedly ignored him that morning now tracked his movement. Not with aggression, with the careful, watchful attention that dangerous creatures give to other dangerous things that have proven themselves unpredictable. It was not friendship. It was not safety. But it was a form of space. Room to breathe. Room to operate. He needed 48 hours. He got 31 before everything went sideways. It was Grax who woke him, just before the night cycle ended, one heavy-scaled hand on his shoulder, voice barely above a breath. She moved early. Mike was awake instantly, the particular alertness of someone trained to come out of sleep combat-ready. How early? Now, Grax said. Mike sat up. The cell was dim, night lighting only. The corridor outside was quiet in the specific way that things are quiet when they have been made quiet deliberately. How many? 4. Coming from a maintenance corridor. They have a guard key. Grax paused. The night rotation guard. Doran's man. Mike swung his legs off the bunk. Mind already moving, running the geometry of the cell, the corridor, the options. Vessa is not with them. Grax added, she will have an alibi. She always has an alibi. Of course she does, Mike said quietly. He stood up. He looked at the cell door, at the corridor beyond it, at the 4 shapes Grax's sharper senses had already detected moving in the dark. Then he looked at Grax. The reptilian was already on his feet, fully awake, positioned. You don't have to, Mike said. I told you, Grax said simply. I bet on the most unpredictable creature in the room. Mike almost smiled. The corridor light flickered once. Then the cell door opened, and Mike Calloway, former Black Ops diplomatic security, scapegoat of the Galactic Council, the human that every gang in Vortex Station 7 had decided was an easy mark, stepped forward into the dark. The sounds that followed lasted less than 90 seconds. When the night cycle lights came back on, for inmates were on the corridor floor. Mike was standing, and Vessa, watching from the far end of the corridor where she had positioned herself to observe from a safe distance, was looking at him with an expression that had moved rapidly and completely from cold calculation to something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Fear. I think, Mike said, walking slowly toward her, it's time we had a conversation about Counselor Veth Doran. Vessa did not run. That was the thing about truly intelligent predators. They knew when the calculus had shifted beyond recovery. Running was a prey behavior, and Vessa, whatever else she was, had not survived 17 years in Vortex Station 7 by behaving like prey. She stood at the end of that corridor with 4 of her people unconscious on the floor behind Mike, and she did the only thing a creature of her particular intelligence could do in that moment. She talked. You want Doran, she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. The voice of someone reorganizing their position in real time. I want out, Mike said. Doran is the path. And you think I can help you? I think you have 17 years of documented favors, payments, and communications with a sitting galactic counselor stored somewhere in this facility. He stopped walking, close enough to make the point, far enough to give her room to think. I think you kept records because you're too smart not to. And I think those records are worth considerably more than whatever he promised you for me. Silence in the corridor. Somewhere deeper in the facility, a pressure door cycled. The distant mechanical breath of a prison that never fully slept. He promised me release, Vessa said, quietly. He promised Drac Ven's last 2 advocates the same thing, Mike said. Check what happened to them. Something moved across Vessa's face. Fast and dark. The expression of someone recalculating a long-held assumption and not liking the result. He was going to remove me anyway, she said, slowly, like the realization was arriving in pieces. Once you finish the job, Mike said, no loose ends. That's how he works. Vessa looked at him for a long time. Then she said, what do you need? What she had was better than Mike had hoped for. 17 years of communications. Payment records routed through 7 different intermediary accounts, each one traceable with the right tools. Encoded messages that Doran had sent personally, believing the encryption was unbreakable, not accounting for the fact that Vessa had spent the better part of a decade quietly having them analyzed by the most technically sophisticated inmates in the facility. She handed it all over. Not because she trusted Mike, Not because she had suddenly developed principles, because she was a survivor. And survivors, when the ground shifts beneath them, move toward the most stable thing available. Right now, and probably inexplicably, the most stable thing available was the human who had arrived 6 months ago as a scapegoat and was leaving as something else entirely. Mike spent the next 6 hours compiling everything. Grax helped. His 9 years inside had given him a working knowledge of the facility's internal systems that the warden had never fully accounted for. They used Drac Ven's communicator for the final transmission. Everything went to Hannah simultaneously. The footage she had found, pulled from a junior staffer on Doran's team who had kept exactly the kind of insurance Mike had predicted. The payment records from Vessa, the encoded communications, the financial trails. 17 years of a sitting galactic counselor using the galaxy's most secure prison as his personal instrument of elimination. Hannah sent it to every independent network at exactly the same moment. 43 simultaneous broadcasts. No time to suppress. No time to discredit. No time for the council's legal machinery to spin up before the story was already everywhere. On every network, every feed, every screen on every station and colony and homeworld in the Galactic Compact. Mike was asleep when it broke. He didn't know about it until morning when he walked into the cafeteria for feeding hour and found the entire facility operating at a frequency he hadn't felt before. Not the tense, predatory watchfulness of normal days. Something electric, confused, alive with the particular energy of people who spend their lives cut off from outside, events suddenly feeling the outside world press through the walls. Grax was waiting at the center table. "It's done," the reptilian said quietly. "The broadcast started 4 hours ago. Doran was taken into council custody at his official residence. They're calling it the largest corruption scandal in 50 years. Mike sat down. He let that land. Really land. 6 months of patience and strategy and surviving inside a machine designed to break him. 6 months of planning from the inside of a cell while the man responsible sat in a council chamber collecting accolades. In my case, Mike said, the council's independent oversight committee filed an emergency review before the first hour was out. Grax paused. They want to look cooperative, move fast, distance themselves from Doran. Another pause. Your release order has already been drafted. Mike looked at the table. Across the cafeteria, Drac Ven caught his eye, said nothing, just held his gaze for a moment with those 3 steady eyes. Then he nodded. Once. Slow. The weight of 9 years and 15 added without cause and a name that had been a locked door for all of it, all of that in one movement of a massive scaled head. Mike nodded back. The release processing took 4 days. Bureaucracy moved at the same speed regardless of the galaxy's political temperature. Forms were forms. Procedures were procedures. Mike filled everything out, answered every question, sat in every waiting room without complaint. On the last day, the warden, stripped of 2 of his guards and aware that his own financial relationship with Doran was 3 news cycles away from becoming public, processed the paperwork himself. In person. Silently. With the careful attention of a man who understood that cooperative behavior now was his best available option. He did not look Mike in the eye. Mike didn't require it. At the docking bay, Hannah was waiting. Civilian ship. Nondescript. The kind of vessel that didn't attract attention in a busy transit lane. She looked at him for a moment when he walked through the bay door. You look terrible, she said. 6 months in the worst prison in the galaxy, Mike said. I look fine. She almost smiled. As the ship cleared the facility's perimeter and the dead star that Vortex Station 7 orbited fell away behind them, Mike stood at the viewport for a long time, looking back at it, the rotating metal structure against the dark, the place that had been designed to erase him. What now? Hannah asked from the pilot's seat. Mike thought about it, about Doran facing his tribunal, about Vessa, still inside but no longer anyone's instrument, about Drac Ven sitting in a cell where the appeal files were finally, after 3 wrongful years, being reviewed, about 12 species worth of dangerous criminals who had decided, based on 6 months of watching one human refuse, to behave like prey that humans were something worth paying attention to. Doran had a deputy, Mike said, someone who managed the day-to-day of the operation, filed the paperwork, handled the transfers. I know, Hannah said. That person is still at large. I know that too. Mike turned from the viewport. I'm going to need a new suit, he said, and a meeting room, and whatever you found on the deputy in the last 4 days, because I know you've already been looking. Hannah pulled up a file on the navigation console without a word. It was thick. Mike sat down, started reading. Behind them, Vortex Station 7 turned slowly in the dark around its dead star. And inside it, in a facility designed to be the end of things, 37 inmates had filed formal appeals in the last 4 days, more than in the previous 5 years combined, inspired somehow by the sudden demonstration that the walls weren't as permanent as everyone had been told, that things could change, that the right person, patient enough and stubborn enough and sufficiently convinced that the truth was worth the cost of finding it, could walk into the worst place in the galaxy and walk back out on their own terms.